And welcome to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. This past week, I had the opportunity to listen to a great speech by one of my good friends and a past guest to the program, Topher Morrison. He's the managing director of Key Person of Influence, which is a local business accelerator based in Tampa Bay, Florida, but whose brand actually has international reach, founded many years ago out of Australia. So I direct you over to keypersonofinfluence.com for more information on this brand as I talk throughout this program on what it encompasses. But I love to listen to him speak because he's a powerful public speaker. He's done it for many years. He spoke for many top brands and has given excellent advice to myself and to many of my peers. And I myself have been through his local Key Person of Influence accelerator program, and it's an extensive and intensive coursework on really just developing your pitch, your brand, your identity, who you are as a business owner and a professional. And so throughout the discussion, I'm going to reference a few times where to go to measure your influence, learn more about this program. But I want to talk about the speech that he gave this past week at the Indo-US Chamber, because it's just a tremendous message, and I think it's great for more and more people to hear this. So he's also a published author, has written 3 or 4 books, including his latest book, which is due out here fairly soon, which he featured on the program in just a couple of weeks, which is the book on public speaking, his primary specialty. But he also had written a book a couple of years back called Collaboration Economy, and what it has to do with is the era of business that we are currently in. We're in the collaboration era, and what does that mean? It means that people no longer value things such as information or what you're producing. It's basically who you know, and it can really get you set apart in your business. And what he does throughout the speech is really fascinating. He takes us through the different eras of business, and each one is centered around the central question: who, what, when, where, and why. And so today we're in the collaboration age, and that's centered around the question of who do you know that I don't know? Who can you connect me to that can help grow my business? Who can you get me in front of? And so businesses today that are succeeding and growing are very collaborative, and they connect with people. Information, things like that are from the past, which were very important, are no longer as relevant and as important because people can simply go online and Google this information. We have a large community of people coming in behind, the baby boomers and Generation X, Generation Yers, the millennials, who don't value the same things that older generations valued. They're more about the experience versus the cost or the information that they obtain. They're all centered around the experience. And so in his speech and in his book, he takes us through these different components of the business. And so as a business owner, it's very important that you think of how you're developing your business and what you are centering it around. And are you centering it around an outdated form of business, albeit information, which is really at a huge discount these days? And a lot of the businesses that are still currently in production and still out there are centered around information, but information is not valuable to people anymore. Before 2008, information was very valuable to people, but the rise of technology, the rise of the search engines and the efficiency in thereof has really put a damper on the ability of people to make money using just information. So let's take you back to what he had talked about. And years ago, or let's go all the way back to the beginning of time, centered around the 5 questions. But in the agricultural age, it was where. The question was, where are you going to plant your crops? And they were the people that were in the agricultural business, whether they are the farmers or producing farm equipment, anything that was centered around agriculture, they were doing the best in the different industries. And so that went on for probably up until probably 1950 or so, probably about 1920, 1930 or so. And then we entered the manufacturing age. And then that question became how are you going to produce the items? How are you going to cut costs? And so that was the central question of what was driving business at the time. So it went from a question of where are you going to produce your product to a question of how are you going to produce your product. And then in the 60s and maybe into the early 70s, we entered the information age. And that was where the lawyers and the financial advisors all came to influence. And so around this is, what do you know? What do I know that you don't know that I can charge you for? And this age lasted for 30 or 40 years up until the collaboration age, and which has overwritten the information age. And so today it's very difficult for people to make money in a business that is just centered around information. He uses a good example when it comes to the taxi cab industry. Taxi cabs for years controlled the information in the city of the shortest and best routes between point A and point B. And so they could charge you for that information. Today, in the information age, they can't do that because people have phones, they have Uber, and they can basically route their own direction between point A and point B. So it really doesn't matter if the driver knows the point A to point B. They're going to get there using their phone. And he talks about how it's also about the experience, not the efficiency necessarily in the trip, but they rate the drivers based on the experience they had. And was the driver friendly? Did they give them something to drink, or a snack or something in the cab ride? And so it's all about experience, and so that is what's driving repeat business versus efficiency and the product at the cost at which you received it. So a very interesting turn of events, and I can even attest to this myself. For many years, up until the last couple of years, was very hesitant in using the new Uber and Lyft services. I thought they were, I wouldn't say I wasn't really too much worried about safety. I liked the efficiency and the knowledge of the taxi drivers, but it's really hard to overwrite the cost difference when you compare the two things. But I can remember being in Chicago just a couple of years ago and summoned an Uber driver to my location. And when they got there, I was like, take me to Wrigley Field. The driver didn't know how to get to Wrigley Field, which shocked me. I mean, he wasn't a cab driver, he was an Uber driver. But you're giving people rides around town and you don't even know your major landmarks in your city. That's like, me in Tampa not knowing where the airport is or not knowing where Raymond James Stadium is. And so I laughed about it. I said, how can you not know where Wrigley Field is? This is Chicago. It's probably one of the most central landmarks in the city. And he just simply said, I'm from the west side. And so whatever that meant, I guess that's a different area of the city. Chicago is large enough, I guess, to have people that don't leave different areas of the city. So I guess wherever Wrigley Field was inside of Chicago, was like a completely different community from the west side. I don't know. I've always grown up in small towns, and even Tampa is a large city. Everybody knows everywhere in terms of major landmarks. If you get into a car and even ask an Uber driver, I'm sure they could get you to the airport. I'm sure they could get you to Raymond James Stadium. But nonetheless, it just shows you that people today are valuing the experience. The information is secondary. And sure enough, he got out his phone and he punched in Wrigley Field, and then he put it up on his dash and he followed that. He even made a couple of wrong turns because some of the roads on GPS devices kind of looked like one and the same, and he went off onto the wrong road. And nonetheless, he got us there, but not exactly in the most efficient of time. But the experience was, enjoyable. He did have a good personality and shared a good conversation. But was he a cab driver with the efficiency and know-how of the city? No, absolutely not. So if you're a business and you're still trying to sell information, think about how readily available that information is to your consumers. Can they go onto Google and Google that information and pull that up and think about, why am I going to pay for your information when I can get it online? And so you got to begin to build your business around the experience and bring in other people to collaborate with in your business. Also, in the next question that's going to come up in probably 30 years or so from now, each of these ages tend to last 30 or 40 years according to his speech. But the last question we went through, where, the how, the what, the who, but the question is the why, and that's going to be the altruistic age. And in this is people are going to be asking why, what is the meaning of life, why am I here, things that I talk about from time to time on this program. And I was thinking about that a little bit more last night, and I was like, well, I can see us entering an age where we are much more questioning into our reality and why we are here, but how can you make money on this? And then I remembered, well, right around the corner is quantum computing. And in quantum computing, the the power of the computer is going to be exponential compared to the bits of data that are running in today's computers. And it's predicted that the algorithms that are inside of these computers are going to be able to basically, prove the existence of God or prove the existence of that we do or do not have free will, because the computing power is exponential to what we have in our computers today. And so quantum computing is probably 30 or 40 years out from being a viable product, but there is a company out there currently producing these called D-Wave. There is a collaboration effort between Google and a couple other major companies that are currently working to produce these computers, but they operate on a completely different level than traditional computers. And so they'll have much more computing power and can produce results that normal computers cannot analyze, such as DNA structures, protein structures, the different ways to schedule the NFL, for instance. They can do that in fractions of a second because the computing power is exponential. And I don't want to get into how that is done, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube, if you Google quantum computing, that will explain how the power of quantum computing is much more powerful than today's computers. And so we enter the altruistic age, more and more businesses could be centered around the power and the influence of quantum computing. So a good discussion this past week on the different ages of business. And when I come back to from the break, I want to go into the second part of his discussion, where he identifies the 5 key components of what every successful business owner has in their business. And so I'll talk about that when I come back from the break on That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Welcome back to That Business Show 2.0 with Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. We have new episodes each weekday morning at 9 a.m. on thatbusinessnetwork.com, and then made available on demand on iTunes and on YouTube. Please subscribe, please like the show, and please talk about it with your friends. We're always looking to grow the program and get the message out to more and more consumers about this, a very valuable product that I put out there for the business community. And one of the things that I like to think of this show is, it's giving back to the community. I've done very well in real estate in my own business, and this is a way for me to give back. And so that's actually one of the things that in the speech this past week with my good friend Topher Morrison of Key Person of Influence based here in Tampa was talking about. And one of the things that they, business owners that are very successful, that they do is that they are content creators to the extent that they produce more than they consume. And so that's the one way I'd like to think of myself, is that I produce way more than I consume. I have a personality trait in business and in life where I always need to be in a position to where I've done more for the individual than they have done for me. It's a personality trait that I can't undo. I can't take from somebody and take without giving back. And really, I've got to be in a position where I've given them more than what they've ever given me for me to be comfortable. It's my natural, I call it like my father mentality. I've got to be in a position of leadership at all times with people. I can't understand it. Most people don't have that type of a problem. Most people are natural consumers and takers of products and information from people. Believe me, I've been used many times by many people because of that component of my personality. But at the end of the day, I hold myself to a higher standard and just say, well, you know what, I just need to produce more, and then I can overcome, that, person right there who did me wrong. But regardless, I am a person who produces way more than I will ever consume. I actually live, I live a decent life, but the majority of the monies that I've made through the year has in some way went to helping other people, and a lot through this program has went to helping other entrepreneurs get their message out to the community. And so that helps with another component of the of what Topher talked about this past week, and that's visibility. People that are successful in business are very visible. They're out there in the community. They're on television all the time. They're on radio all the time. They're getting on podcasts. They're out and, talking at local events and business events. And so people that are successful in their business, they're incredibly visible within their community. So those are two things that I took from his speech that I am doing well, but there are things in my business that I know that I lack. And one of the key components of what business owners have that are successful is the first point that he talked about, and that's clarity. They are crystal clear in what you do. And that's something that I struggle with both in my real estate business and then in the podcast that I do too, is I lack clarity. I know that's always been a problem of mine. And so being crystal clear on what you do is very tantamount to success. How often do we have people that when you ask them, well, who are you marketing to? Who are your client? And they say, well, I can work with anybody. My business works with anybody. In his speech, he calls that the kiss of death. If a business owner says that they work with anybody and then they can help anybody, they don't have clarity, they don't have that niche, they really don't have that dialed in that the way that they need to do. And so he uses the example of a financial planner in which they talk about, how they are different, but their speeches are actually all the same. They all talk about how they're different because they take the time to listen to the person, get to know them on an intimate, personal level, and it's the same pitch from financial planner to financial planner. In essence, they're all giving that same pitch. And so for somebody who is not really, up to speed on what the competition is doing, they're really putting themselves, at a disadvantage. He uses the example, for instance, a financial planner could, clarify and become more niche by saying, I work with divorced women over the age of 40. He, goes on to add, you probably should have a good story for that so you don't come off sounding like a pervert. But nonetheless, that is a much more niched part of a business than saying, well, I'm a financial planner, I can work with anybody. And so now you become niched and you become known in that specific area. And so the natural reaction of many people is, well, if I niche down so much, I'm going to be losing all this other business that I could be taking. Studies have shown, and he talks about it more in his speech that I won't go about, but that's not the case. When you become niched, you get more specific business and you get more than what you think that you would than if you were to take on many, many different people throughout your business. And so the key component of a successful business owner is they're incredibly clear in what they do. For instance, I sell real estate. I don't really nail it down to a specific area of real estate, except for the fact that I sell foreclosures. That is probably a pretty detailed niche compared to the rest of the industry. But that is actually starting to go into my past, and so I got to reinvent myself because the market is changing. And if you've listened to my real estate edition of the program, I go into that a lot more. But that's another area that a lot of realtors struggle with, is they're so desperate for business that they take anybody and anything that comes through the door, and they don't take the time to properly vet them, and they end up driving around on the weekends only to lose them to a sign call or another realtor the next week. And so that's a problem in the real estate business, that realtors lack clarity. And so if you're going to be successful in your business, nail down that clarity, practice it, and develop your pitch. And within the Key Person of Influence Accelerator program, that's one of the core features of the program, is developing your pitch. And the pitch has like 5 different parts to it. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it works to develop, your message and what your clarity, why you do it, and who your target is. And so you can learn all about this over at keypersonofinfluence.com. There's a chapter here based in Tampa. Topher often gives discovery sessions where you can go meet with him one-on-one. The money that he charges for the session is donated, and so it's a worthwhile opportunity for you to go and sit down and really learn from somebody who really understands business the way that Topher does. And he's been working with business owners and professionals for 30 plus years or more, an accomplished author of 4 different books, and a tremendous public speaker. And this talking about the speech that he gave this past week at the Indo U.S. Chamber, which was an incredible analysis analysis of business and where it was and where it is and where it is going, and how different business owners that are successful are centered around 5 core aspects of their business. And that first one, actually the first one, I kind of digressed into a couple of the latter ones to begin with, but the first one that you've got to have dialed in is clarity. And so that comes from your pitch, and that comes from really being dialed in to a certain niche. Another thing that makes business owners very successful is that they are creators. Like I said earlier, they produce more than they consume. And so I think that's something that I do very well in my life. I'm, like I said, not a natural taker. I'm a natural giver more and more so. And so business owners that are successful, they are creators. They produce more than what they consume. The next area of that business owners that are successful have is they have a lot of credibility. And there's 2 different ways to get credibility. One of them is that you work in an industry for 30, 40 years. Nobody's going to question your ability to do whatever it is that you do after you've worked 30 or 40 years in a business. Really, after 10 or 15 years, you can definitely kind of hang the credibility piece on your wall. But for people that are starting up and they need to have credibility quickly, well, that's a long-term strategy, and one that a lot of people are not going to survive. And if they do it, that way. And so the best way to develop credibility is to become a published author. And through the Key Person of Influence program, that's one of the things that you do throughout the course, is you're working on your book. What is your message to your community? You should have a book that is about 30 to 40,000 words, and they work to develop that throughout the program. And I've had countless people on this program that have talked about, what a book did for their business. And Topher even uses the example when he is on the program, that when he was, beginning out as a public speaker, that he couldn't get more than $3,000 for a keynote. And so he wrote a book. And from the moment that the book became published, his fee went from $3,000 to $10,000, simply because he could tell the promoters of the event, I'm a published author, I can speak on this topic, and his fee immediately tripled at that point. And so I've had many, many people on this program that have spoken very, highly of what writing a book can do for their business, and because it gives you that credibility piece. And I always joke a lot of times, people probably don't even read the book. It's just the fact that it's there, maybe, poorly written, and maybe boring and vague. It may be obvious information, especially if you're a financial planner and there's thousands of books out there on financial planning, or if you're an attorney writing on divorce, for instance, or maybe, hundreds of different books upon that. But the fact that you have that book and you can say that I authored a book, that gives you the credibility piece that others are lacking. The next thing, they're incredibly visible, something that I do on this program, and business owners that are successful do. They're highly visible in their community. And so how can you become highly visible? You can start getting on podcasts, and there are plenty of opportunities to get on them. There is a whole circuit of people out there looking for podcast interviews. And if I can help you get on these shows, including my own, reach out to me, jamie@tampabayradio.com, and I can help you with that. And then the last piece, that if you have to do all the other 4 things effectively, that comes is you develop partnerships with other business owners and professionals. And that is the last component of a successful business owner, is that they begin to form partnerships and their growth becomes exponential. Up until that point, the ride is, like a sine wave. It's up and down, up and down. You go through many peaks and you go through many, many valleys, or many people may go through a lot of valleys and no peaks, and it'll lead to failure. Nonetheless, if you do everything well, you'll eventually get to partnerships and things will start to go up, up, and up. We have a resource on our site underneath at thatbusinessnetwork.com. Underneath the resources tab, measure your level of influence. I direct you over to that right now, where you can measure your level of influence in your business. It's a nice little scorecard that takes about 5 minutes to complete. And so it's all centered around these 5 different things: the clarity, the ability to create, credibility, visibility, partnerships. So again, go over to thatbusinessnetwork.com underneath the resources tab and select or measure your influence level. It takes about 5 minutes, and it'll give you a score of how influential you are in your industry and your business. And again, thatbusinessnetwork.com underneath the resources tab. So again, you've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.